Hello, let's talk about how I made Less is More and also the intro track to Dichotomy from the inside out. It's very based on guitar, almost entirely, lots of granular processing as well as, more traditional guitar, but it's almost, with a few exceptions, almost entirely based, melodically it's based entirely out of guitars. And it's called Less is More because it was made on basically this Gibson Les Paul. I had just gotten it when I was initially writing this track, and it basically inspired the entire thing. So, a little play on words, and Less is More is born with LES as opposed to LESS. So, that all being said, let's dive in. So, the first thing you will see is all of this right here. This is all the intro. This is all from the inside out. And it's all granular pads, almost entirely. Some of this, for instance, like ADA H9, it sounds like this. All I know is, I can't see it because it was all recorded on the modular and it says H9, so it definitely went through an Eventide H9 pedal, which I use a lot for outboard processing. So consequently, it was most likely, I'm assuming it was a Noise Engineering Ataraxic Iteritas oscillator through the H9, but it's really just a lot of pads, like grain pads here. And the source could be anything, to be honest, but it was probably a guitar. This is kind of like the story. It's called Instrument 3 DP1, Duplicate 1, because I labeled it really well. But it's really like, it's the distortion sound in that intro. And without the distortion, without some EQ, it sounds like this. So it's just a granulized something. Could have been a Reese bass, to be honest, that was granulized, but once you add the distortion and the EQ is cutting out a lot of like low end and mids, that's when you get, which sounds great. And the distortions come from Isotope Trash, and I'm using the distortion type Cracked Actress, because it just sounds awesome. It's very heavy, but not totally blown out. And then there's a moment where it just glitches out, and that's really just doing some audio editing directly in there. So just cutting it really tight, and there are little fades, and just glitching it out that way. It's 64th notes, so now you know, but that is the split of how tight it is edited. But in general, yes, the intro really is just a lot of pads that were really all made out of the box for the most part. You can see like there's some Rhodes here, and this was recorded on the Rhodes right over there. But when you add the reverb to it, and this would have come from the H9 probably. Sounds really nice. It also could have, it may have actually come from the Eventide Space pedal also, but I mean, it's the same exact algorithm. So that's basically the intro. It's just building pads so that it kind of just, ramps up in intensity up into when we get introduced to really like the starting point of Less is More. And there are just some big swells at the end here, and this is kind of what, brings you to that transition. Like these EBow bends, and that's like taking an EBow on the guitar and bending the note while I'm holding the EBow. That's not an EBow bend. It says it is, but this one definitely is, for instance. So I'm sure what I just recorded the EBow and just called it all EBow bends, but it's all EBow. And morning reactor, ha ha ha, spelled not like the morning, but I'm sure I did it in the morning, which is why I called it that. But when you add up all of these pads together, you get the swell here with the, let's add that. And that leads us right into the beginning of Less is More, which starts with these guitar harmonics. And as you can see, the only thing on this channel is just a high pass filter, basically. So all the delays, all the reverbs, those were printed directly into it. And the delay came from an Eventide Rose pedal. As you can see, I use a lot of Eventide pedals because they sound amazing. And then it also would have then gone through the space because they're linked up on the pedal board. So the H9 is actually a separate. I actually have the H9 on my rack set up as a send, where so it's actually not part of my pedal board. And then all the pedals are all routed together. So this was done, the amp would have been an Axe Effects, which is right there in the amp right there, or in the rack right there. So I would have just routed it out, run it through the pedals, and then printed it. So consequently, the plug-in chain is absolutely minimal because everything was done outside the box. But there are two main instro elements here that really are kind of the cornerstones of this piece. And the first is the harmonics, and they're just played guitar harmonics. And the other is this bass sound. And I mean, I love this sound. I really love this sound. Especially once you get the note changes up here. And what's cool about this sound also, it's made out of a guitar harmonic. That's actually my favorite thing about it, but it's put into Reactor and it's pitched very far down. So I have a granular patch I made in Reactor. I don't believe it's, actually, you know what? Let's see if I can pull it up. But, and then I can show you how it's made. But it's like, I love granular synthesis, obviously. And it was made taking a harmonic. All right, so it's not, no sound there. We're gonna have to, we need Gallup's Black Hole 01. So let's find Gallup's, that would be it. And we need Gallup's Black Hole again. Blah, 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 blah. Here we are. So now it should play. Okay, fantastic. So this is the harmonic. Just with basically like an infinite reverb on it. However, so if I just have the starting point pretty far back into the file itself. So you know, the nice thing is now you could, you know, turn this into chords if you really wanted. But if you play it very low, you get these really nice resonant bass sounds. So that's the sound right there. So it's such a beautiful bass sound, and it was built entirely out of the guitar harmonic. But as far as Reactor goes, it's just a basic patch I made just using the Grain Cloud oscillator. There's nothing particularly crazy, it's just homemade. But it works really well. So that's how the bass is made, and that is really a signature sound of Less is More. So let's get rid of that. But so we have the harmonics, and then we have that, you know, cool harmonic bass sound. And that is really the intro of how Less is More begins. And let's just zoom out a bit. And we also have this pad. And this pad is another one of like a granular pad. It was probably based off that harmonic too, or something similar. And that is going to be kind of lingering in the background of the whole track. You can see it just kind of comes in and out. And right here is really where like the groove happens. So let's go to this section because that's all intro. And then, you know, you just have this intro part of Less is More. And then we start to add in basically fading in the drum section, right leading up to that main drop, if you will. But it's just the kick at first, and the kick just fades in. And I'm using that the EBow guitar again as that transition, the EBow bend. Which is a trick I love. I love using an EBow and bending it and then feeding it through a bunch of delay and reverb. You get this really evocative, very cinematic kind of sound. So that's exactly what's being used for that transition. And then there's these P harmonics also. Which I'm going to assume is output portal, because I know I used portal a lot in this piece, and outputs portal, you know, it's a granular delay buffer freezing tool. Very cool. So I did absolutely use that a lot. So once we get into the drop section, or I guess the first, not even a drop, but it's a main groove, and there are just two elements. You've got a kick, and you've got this little bass hit, really. I have it going through my drum bus, so it's kind of a bass, but kind of not this. I mean, you could call it a tom. I mean, it's almost like an 808 kind of thing. But, and it was made in machine, apparently, because that's what it says. And the processing I have on my, let's say, 808, it's all coming from the Slate virtual mix rack. And I'm using the API style EQ into a distressor, into this saturator. So without the Slate stuff, it sounds like this. And with the Slate. So it's doing quite a lot. And I mean, you can see there's a lot of compression on the distressor, and there's definitely some saturation. And I'm really just bumping a little bit of the low end with the API. But this EQ in general sounds phenomenal. I mean, it's one of my favorite plugins Slate makes, but one of my favorite EQ plugins, period. So that's going right there. And eventually we get a few more elements leading into like really where the track takes off. And you have this granular, it's called a grain snare, but it's really more of a shaker. I mean, it's going to fade in. So actually, let's just take this section. And without any of the processing, it sounds like that. It is stereo, but not super wide. And the EQ going on, it's taking out all the low end, boosting the highs. And then I have a doubler. And this is really just to make it super wide. And then I'm just using an LFO tool just to duck it, sidechain it, what have you. And there's another shaker as well. And this one sounds like this. And you can hear it's much more live, like that was absolutely recorded, whereas the other was synthesized. I definitely recorded that one. And without any stuff, sounds like that. Then it goes first to a compressor, and it's just kind of evening out, as you can see the, oh, cat. As you see right over here, like those hits are definitely louder than some of the others. So the compression is just evening everything out a little bit. Goes into an EQ, and this is where it's taking out basically everything below 1K or 1500 actually. And I'm taking out some of like that high mid resonance. So that makes it much cleaner. And then it went into a Slate Infinity EQ, and it's just boosting the high end without. And also same LF tool or LFO tool. So those are the shakers. And that also is when you get introduced to ultimately the that like lead guitar lick. I call it the Dorian lick because it's in the mode Dorian. The song's in D Dorian. And there is also these gallops. And the gallops are, I mean, it's like a gallop guitar, dun 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 dun, what have you. It's going through a lot of delay, but this is something that is used throughout the track, really to just accentuate motion and that there's going to be a transition. So they sound like this. So it really is pushing that forward momentum without any processing. It's this. Let me take off the reverb. So that's it. And there's an EQ doing absolutely nothing. Who knows why? But another compressor. There's a filter that gets automated, and then a delay, the Valhalla delay in a bucket brigade mode, which is like a memory man or something like that. I love bucket brigade delays. The Eventide Rose is based on that also, actually. And then a virtual mix rack, and it's just acting as a gate, really just because the Valhalla can actually add a little bit of noise. So I just wanted to gate it when it's silent, or when nothing's playing. And then everything's also getting sent to an Eventide black hole reverb. So that is, of course, what's going on there. But that is what introduces us to this lick, which is obviously one of the main hooks of this song. And it's entirely played. There is no looping here because I wanted the performance to get more exciting. So it starts off very palm muted, and by the time we get towards the end, the notes are a lot more open. And it sounds really nice with the delay and the reverb when those upper notes kind of just play off each other and then get delayed. And once again, these are hardware delays. These are printed directly into the file itself. So without anything, even just a little bit of EQ, this is just the EQ setting and nothing else. So you can hear the delays printed in it, and that's the Eventide Rose again, because I had gotten the Rose pretty soon when I was doing this track originally. And I mean, it's like my favorite delay. So it's used on everything. And so there's some compression also just to even it out, but it really just brings up the delays a little bit. There's a filter just to do some kind of transitional effects, but for the most part, it's staying wide open. And then I'm using this fractal reverb, which is based on the same reverb in the Axe-Fx itself. So it just sounds really good to me, and I like it. And fun fact, that little Dorian lick, that was definitely inspired by a Dream Theater section of a Dream Theater song. And I grew up as a guitarist. Dream Theater was one of my favorite bands, and I still love Dream Theater. So, and I've always been very inspired by John Petrucci's playing. So even though this is, a progressive house tune for all intents and purposes, you can take the boy out of progressive metal, but you can't take the progressive metal out of the boy, so to speak. So it's in me no matter what, which explains a lot. And then there's just a little fill here, and I'm just automating a high pass filter just to, introduce that section. But it sounds like this. It's cool. So what's happening? It's just this high pass filter, and there's some panning automation as well that you can see, but it just does this. So that's it. It's just a cool little transitional effect. Nothing more than that. So let's go further into this track and see where it goes. Now the drums, there's a lot more going on there. Let's talk about that. So now we really have a pretty full drum section. And it sounds like, wait, there's more. But wait, there is more. This is the drum section. All right, so aside from the shakers, which I already talked about, and our little kick in 808, there is now yet another shaker that kind of gets layered in there. It sounds like this. And it's a really short, almost like hi-hat kind of shaker. It's out of machine also, which the drum synths in the machine are really quite good. And it's just got some EQ, but it's really not doing much. It's really just for automation. There'll be sections where you can see that right in the breakdown, for instance, that it gets automated just to take the high end out. And since there's really no low end in this thing, it's almost like doing volume automation, but not quite. And there's also an LFO tool, once again, just acting as my sidechain. And it's interesting. Usually I've kind of stayed away from using tools like LFO tool for quite a long time, to be honest. But, and usually I would just do it straight in the audio, or I'd use a sidechain compressor. So it was, more reactive as opposed to automated. But sometimes it just really works. And in the case of this, it just worked. So then I also have like just all these extra percussion bits. Some of this came from an Electron machine drum, which sits right there. So like MD hat, for instance. It's not a hat, but I don't know. It's called that, but it's not. That's a little, like a little high tom. Would have come from the machine drum though. And this is a hat. I can see that. So that's also from the machine drum, and probably what ended up happening is, because what I'll often do with like mono sources, I'll double track them and then put it onto a stereo file, pan them left and right, and so I get this really nice wide sound effect. So the little tom pop, most likely that happened after I did the tom, or after I did the hats, and I just didn't misname or didn't relabel it, because sometimes I just, I'm too caught up and I just don't care, and I'm like, yep, good enough. I can see what it is, done, moving on. Then I have these like slate hats. These come from the Stephen Slate drum library. And they exist just to, give a little bit more of a live feel as opposed to like the drum machine style of drums. And then I have this percussive stuff, like these grain snares. I'll just play all three of them. And to be dead honest, I don't know really where they came from. But I would guess it had something to do with probably running my whole drum bus through. It very well could have been Outputs Portal, or maybe even throwing stuff into like Ableton Live or something and just stretching it that way. But it's all, a lot of times what I'll do, I will granulize a sound. Could have been Reactor even, or Metasynth, who knows. But I'll just destroy a sound and then just like cut out little tiny bits of it, and that's how I create a lot of kind of like unique percussive elements. So that's what would have happened there. And as the track progresses, then we finally get a snare drum as well. And one of them comes from Machine, and that's like, a 808 style snare. And the EQ is basically just taking out the fundamental and the low end without it, with it. And DMG Audio Equilibrium is my EQ du jour, or do many jours, many days of EQ with that one. Then there's a Manus snare. This comes from a Manus Ateritas, which is the noise engineering module. And it's distorted without the EQ, with it. And another Manus snare sounds like this. And this is just noise, basically. So you layer the three things up, and similar, once again, just taking out the low end, not doing much else there. Layer the snares together. That's the sound of our snares layered together. So now that we have basically the entire percussion section going all at once, I mean, this is just an effect, just reverb on a hat. This is the whole percussion section. And it's going through a bus compressor on my drum bus. It's just a slate, the SSL slate, the slate gray, and it's just shaving off, about 1 dB to 1.5. It's not doing a ton, but important to note, I have the high pass filter in the side chain of the compressor engaged, so nothing under, it says 88. So like basically the sub of the kick is not going to trigger the compressor, because if it did, you'd get a lot more compression, and I don't want that. So I'll pull it back just so you can see what it's doing, or what the high pass filter is doing, but you're going to get a lot more compression now once I pull it down. So you can see the kick's really driving it. So with the high pass filter, the compression's a bit more even. And these are like my default settings I have for this EQ, and that's because this is also my main like bus compressor EQ, or bus compressor. And it's a 10 millisecond attack and 300 millisecond release. So that's just in a ratio of here I'm using 2, often I use 4, whatever. But that's my basic setting. So then we just have all these elements building, over the course of, a couple minutes. And, let's just take a listen to all the melodic stuff right now. So that bass sound that comes in at that section, and it really, it's low and it's rumbly and it drives that motion home. And that's from Newfangled Audio Generate, which is a fantastic synth. And without any processing, it sounds like this. Whoopsie. Very subby. So I've got a little bit of EQ there, and it's just shaving off the super lows. It's getting shaved off at 28 hertz, and it's a slope of 18, so it's not super steep. And then there is a filter, and that's just to make it subbier, and it's an 8-pole filter, so it's, that's a lot of high-end cut. Kind of unnecessary, to be honest. But I'm using this Waves Max bass, and this is actually really important because it's adding this upper harmonic now. So it's adding an octave, basically, and that really just makes the whole sound thicker. And that also then follows the chord progression right here with the granular, whatchamacallit, the harmonic bass. So it's very cool sounding. And the other thing to note is I actually am not sidechaining or LFO tooling this bass at all in this section. I just wanted it to just punch you in the face with sub, and I didn't particularly care about being perfectly clean. I just think in this moment it sounded better like that. So then you can see the gallops are gonna get added back in over here because we're getting to the breakdown. So, did you recognize some of that from the intro? Because you should have the intro track. And because I'm using those same pads now in the breakdown of this, so you're recapitulating that same idea that was established in From the Inside Out. So we get those same kind of EBO bends and those same kind of ethereal pads, and it's just to reinforce that initial theme. So that brings us to the main the breakdown riff, which is actually, it makes me think of kind of like Dave and Cowboy from Boards of Canada or something like that. But this is the guitar part. So it's actually all, originally, in the previous sections, it was very, very obviously in D minor or D Dorian. And now we're introducing D major. That chord progression definitely starts in D major, but then goes from D major. So it goes D major, B flat major, C major. So it's just moving around major chords, which is not diatonic necessarily, but it sounds great. So that's what it's doing. And we are using then those same pads we kind of embellished before, like the EBow bends and those atmospheric granular guitar pads. So if we just solo all this stuff, I mean, this is kind of like my favorite stuff of the entire piece, to be honest, because I just love the cinematic ethereal stuff. So that's basically everything that the breakdown is based on. It's all guitar and, all the EBow atmospherics, which is just so cool. So and then in the second half of the breakdown, we introduce the bass. And then that same harmonic bass. So the sub of that bass, it's the same patch, same generate patch as before. This time it actually does have a little bit of LFO tool going on. And then I have a Moog, it's called Stereo Moog because like I said, with my double tracking, I double track two mono parts from it's a Moog sub 37. And that sounds like this, and it's the filters opening up. It's just eighth note plucks. Starts real low, goes through a reverb also, or it's getting sent to a reverb, I should say. It's the B2 from 2C Audio, and it's just opening up over the entire course of this section. So just big open filter. Ooh, drama's about to happen. Hands in the hair, yada yada yada. So it does that, and the gallops get introduced as well again. So it's all these different things just driving momentum because, we're building out this breakdown. More gallops here. And then the portal gallops. And the portal gallops are from outputs portal, like I was talking about earlier, and they're transposed up an octave. Sounds great. It's going through an EQ and a reverb, but without it, it's that. So portal's cool. And then really for this final groove section of the track, I mean, every element's fully established at this point. So now we just want to tie the whole thing back together. The only new thing I add is now a sine wave, and this is going to run underneath the generate bass, which is now being across everything. It's no longer just hitting certain downbeats. Now it's going to be throughout. The chord progression is going to be running through the whole track now. And it's just a sine wave. Crazy, right? Groundbreaking. It gets layered with the generate bass. And the main difference that I should say about this generate bass versus the other generate basses is because now that there's a sine underneath it, I've cut the low end out of it. So the sine is now taking the place of the low end that was there previously. But that's it. And the only other thing I add now in the drums is a little, some knife percussion. It was like recording knives. So I called it Knives Out, haha. And it sounds like this. Let's take the reverb off. What's the reverb? It's a Fab Filter reverb. So it's just like chink chink. Just sounded cool. So I said, screw it, why not? So those hit on downbeats, it's 4 bar, it's every 8 bars, but it's it's every 16 bars, but it's 8 bars into the phrase. So it's a sound effect. It's cool with the drums. It's fun. And there's just a big blast of white noise when post breakdown. And again, it's functioning as a crash. It's just like high-end excitement. But when you factor all the things in together, right? And then there's also like this stuff. This is a granular guitar pitched really high up. And that, you know, gives you that high-end lift also. And then you also get like a real guitar swell right on the downbeat, and it's a reverse guitar into the swell. And then you just get, you know, that big strum. So that's pretty cool. And that's really everything in here. So then we basically just then start reestablishing the little elements we had before, like the Dorian delay comes back. And now the nice thing is there's no third. So there's no F in, no minor third in the Dorian lick. So it's technically not Dorian because there's no minor third. But that means I can now play it over the breakdown riff, and it's not going to clash because the break riff is major. And the other thing I did, as you can see, I automated down the volume of the Dorian riff by 9 dB when the break riff comes in. But just so you can hear harmonically what's going on, let's just take it off. So harmonically it works really well, but it's automated down so that when the section comes in, because remember there's a lot going on here, it gives the focal point now to the break riff. And then I have the harmonics back now underneath also. So these are happening. So it's all those elements that were really introduced separately. They're all being played together now. And then you have, of course, you know, like the cool harmonic bass. And it ends just as we began with those harmonics and the gallops. And that is entirely how, that's all the parts of Less is More. That's a little bit of how they were mixed together. For those people who always ask, oh, what's on your master bus processor? Or what's on your master bus? It's like, what's your mastering chain? There isn't one. For the sake of this video, I put a newfangled audio elevate on it just to kind of act as a little bit of a limiter, but that's not how I did it on the track. So really, this is actually the session in which I recorded the final mix out of, and then the mix would have gone to a separate mastering session that I did later. So the only thing actually really running is this, which is a, the Slate FG Gray, the SSL Slate, which once again I love. I had it on the drum bus, and I had it on my overall mix as well. This time I'm letting the low end trigger it a little bit, but I'm not pushing it super hard. Like, you can see I'm barely tickling 1 dB of gain reduction. And then I have a limiter just on the very end, but it's not limiting. It's just in case there happens to be like a peak when I was recording it. I just slapped it on there, but it's not limiting anything. at all. So yes, my master processing on this is absolutely minimal because I want to have a clean mix that's later going to go into the mastering session, and the mastering session's when everything crazy will happen. So that is how Less is More is made, as well as the intro track from the inside out. And Less is More came out just last, or I guess a week and a half ago. And there will be track breakdowns for every track of Dichotomy moving forward. So stay tuned, do the subscribe thing if you care. I won't be offended if you don't, because I hate subscriptions too. But if you want to check out more of the stuff, just stay tuned and listen to more stuff on Dichotomy. There's music coming out every week. And for really the next 3 months, I'm going to be bombarding your Spotify with your release radar if you follow me. So check it out and hope you like the music. And I'm going to stop talking now. So see ya. Take care. Bye.